Hi, I'm Steve Clapham. Welcome to the Behind the Balance Sheet podcast, where we meet leading investors and commentators and educate ourselves about the world of investing and the world at large. Our mission is to remove some of the mystique around investing and improve our understanding of what makes a successful investment or indeed an unsuccessful one. Our goal is to inform, educate, and entertain. We hope you enjoy this and every episode.
Behind the Balance Sheet and affiliates and podcast guests may own shares or have an economic interest in securities discussed in this podcast, which is aired for your education and entertainment only. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or relied upon for investment decisions. Always do your own research.
Hi, I'm Steve Clapham. I'm the founder behind Balance Sheet, and I'm here with Joel Holford from Blackwood, a leading executive search firm, to talk about how to get a job in asset management. And what we're going to talk about is the difference between getting a job at a long-only fund and getting a job at a hedge fund. And Joel, those two are quite different, aren't they?
They can be, is the main answer to that. Exactly. I think if you go to, there's a whole degree of spectrum. On one side, you have the type of long-term, very concentrated investor who will invest in 10 things for 10 years. And what you do there is quite a different job to being at a multi-manager where you are covering 40 stocks and you trade 3 to 4 times a month within that area, or even more.
And what makes somebody good at doing one thing or more appropriate for one role versus the other? Is it your own internal personality, or is it are there skills that different skills apply? I mean, how should someone who's not sure about what they want to do, how should they think about that?
I think the skills that you actually need to do both parties are quite similar. Ultimately, it's can you understand what the business is doing, and then the time frame you invest in is different. I think the informational edge you have to be, and the analytical edge you have to be a very short-term investor, or even someone who invests over 3 to 6 months, is you have to try and beat other people who are going to be very invested in this area and understanding what's going to happen with that stock as well. To invest over a longer duration, you have the slight advantage of competing in a very different universe. But ultimately, I think you need to know who you are, what the companies are doing, and ultimately why you should be invested here versus somewhere else at a given time.
And are there differences in the way you should prepare for those sorts of interviews?
There can be. Again, it's there's within the multi-manager hedge funds, the preparation and the process is very well honed.
So a multi-manager, you're talking about a pod shop.
A pod shop, people like Citadel, Point Entity, Millennium, they are the ones who will, if you want to come in and be an investor, they're the best training ground you can ever get. Their infrastructure, their data, their systems, everything is the Rolls Royce of investing. But you have to invest in a very specific way, ultimately, which is within their risk parameters. What it trains you to do is not only know your stocks very well, and you will know these stocks better than anyone in the streets, but also understand really how to put forward a portfolio, how to make a risk-adjusted or risk-managed investment portfolio. And they have very good ways to make you and to develop you there. But ultimately, you need to go in there and to prepare. The process will be you go in there, you meet some people, the business development people, the analyst you're working for. Then you'll do a case study, which is a 3-hour typically look at this stock. Let's discuss it afterwards. And then you'll go through a bunch of different psychometrics at that point as well. If you're going to invest with a typically longer term asset manager, these tend to be more like, let's get to know each other. Let's understand how you believe, what's your philosophy around this, around are we aligned in how we operate? Because typically it could be a team of 3 or 4 who want to know and add one more to their team. And it means a lot to them in a very different way. So it's more
So your personality and how you fit into the team is more important if you're a big long only shop, or do you think it's still?
It matters with both, but I think ultimately the interview process tends to be more, let's have more interviews, more discussions here, and then give you, say, a 7 or 12 day, or even some people have a month to do a case study where they take it at home and then produce what they can in that period. And that's a different sort of process to someone who is doing a 3-hour timed assessment.
And in a way that the 3-hour timed assessment's easier, isn't it? Because if you're given something to take away, I mean, do they expect you to work on it for the weekends, and do they expect you to put as days and days and days of effort into it? Is that the idea behind doing that?
Ultimately, they do want to see that you're driven to do the job, because for them, they want you to come in and they don't want to hire more people all the time. So they want you to stick for a very long time. So I'd say there's a degree of, it does demonstrate intent and commitment to the process. Definitely, if you have more time, you are able to do more work and more thinking. But actually, we've seen people who, after a month, have come in and said, here's 4 pages. This is why it's the most important 4 pages that you need to read. There is other stuff we can talk about and have a big discussion about, but ultimately, the stock is going to move based on 1, 2, 3. Here's the further risk factors. If I had more time / resource, I would do this, this, and this. That's really what they want to see. If that's in 2 pages versus 40, it doesn't matter as much as long as your analysis is.
No, absolutely. I'm a great believer. It's actually much harder to write a shorter
Yes.
note. And one of the main problems I see with my young students, who sometimes in one of our online courses, they're asked to produce a stock pitch. It's 80 pages is not, having more pages is not better. Having fewer pages is better. People find that very difficult to understand. And what sort of pitfalls should people avoid? What do you most often see with things going wrong in that process?
There tends to be 2 sides. One is clearly the aptitudes. If they haven't managed to do the right model, they make mistakes here, or they've not had the right level of training and get kind of caught out because there's other people who are better than them. That's a clear aptitude mistake. I think the attitudes are more important to focus on. So the attitudes that you can not demonstrate are, if you don't demonstrate humility.
Right.
So whatever environment you're in, you're there to learn. You're there to, it's an apprenticeship model, this whole world. So whoever's going to teach you is giving a lot of their time to make sure that you can then give them resources and give them information back, which they can utilize. But if you're not willing to learn, if you already think you know what you're doing, because you've made some money in your personal, in your PA, versus what they're doing there, that's a huge one. Not having the resilience to actually take the mistakes you're going to make well and to bounce back from it. Not being able to, it's a very strange thing to say, but not being able to, willing to take risk is something that we've seen before.
Oh, how does that manifest itself?
It could manifest in the way that they'd ask you, like, what's the biggest risk you've taken and why? People don't have a good answer for it, or people say, what happens and how do you, where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on the risk scale? And if people say 4 or 5, they're quite cautious. Equity investing isn't a cautious career. Ultimately, I think people need to show, like, I'm willing to take risk when it's measured and balanced and within the right reason. People won't pay you as an active manager to not take risk.
No, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that, because I would consider myself quite a cautious person. But when it comes to investing, well, I'm trying to make the maximum amount of reward for the least amount of risk.
Oh, exactly.
So being risk averse isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's measuring your risk and understanding it.
Appropriate risk is the right way of thinking.
No, absolutely. And those are very difficult questions to answer. So how do you prepare for the questions? As a headhunter, when you've got a good candidate, will you tell them about what sort of questions to expect, or how do people know what to expect? How do they avoid getting caught up in these difficult questions?
You absolutely should ask your headhunter as many questions as you can, and your headhunter will always be completely open with you about should always be completely open with you about the background, the history, the personalities of people you're meeting, so you are not surprised by anything which you should have prepared for. For example, some very senior investors will go very personal with the questions, which are understanding, like, what drives you, what are your risks, how did you grow up, and every decision you've made through the whole process. And the reason they're getting quite personal with you is because that does impact how you take risks and does impact how you decide, how you respond to situations where you're not right. The only way you can ever show these is through examples. And if you're a graduate or early in your career, you likely haven't got professional examples to fall back on. So it becomes quite personal, and people can also get quite jarred when they're not ready for that.
Yeah.
But you should always ask your headhunter, and they should always be open with you, because otherwise you will find out things later, and that's worse for everyone.
So that's a fantastic summary of what to go for. So the best thing you can do when you're going for a job in an asset manager is have a good headhunter like Joe and ask them lots of questions, because that way you won't get caught out by the questions in the interview. I'm Steve Clapham. I've been talking to Joe Holford from Blackwood, the executive search firm. Thank you for watching.